So I want to respond to a Hangout, this was one of these like supervillain special things. Like, it's not just Batman versus the Riddler, but it's the Riddler and Catwoman and the Penguin and the Joker. Yeah. Oh no, that's the Penguin, isn't it? Sorry, all at the same time. Right. Shows how much I know about these things, doesn't it, really? But I know more about these supervillains than I do about the Riddler and the Joker, because we had Kevin Logan hosting it. We had a special drop-in appearance of a dramatic reading by Steve Shives. We had Kristi Winters, and we had the godfather of it all, the Penguin of all of this crap. We had P.Z. Myers in the house. Ladies and gentlemen, and primarily the function of this Hangout was going to be to talk about Seth Andrews. I'm going to talk about quite a number of things here, but I don't want to dwell too much on Seth Andrews other than in the title. And this was the title that Kevin Logan had come up with: Seth Andrews gaslights his critics. Just in case some of you are not aware of what gaslighting refers to in this context, or at least is supposed to refer to in this context, it is a form of heavy psychological abuse that takes place within a relationship. Could be a romantic relationship, doesn't have to be. In which there is abuse taking place of one form or another between the abuser and the victim. And then on top of that primary abuse, there is then a very deep and heavy level of psychological abuse that takes place, whereby the abuser seeks to undermine the mental state of the victim by trying to make the victim question their own sanity by suggesting that the events that the victim thinks has taken place has never actually taken place. So there are two very, very important factors. Well, there are many important factors in terms of gaslighting. One is that it's the abuser that is doing it, and the second that it's been done for a particular reason, which is to undermine the mental state of the victim, to try and make the victim think that they're going mad and that they're just imagining everything that has taken place. What it is not supposed to apply to is a third party coming along and making their independent evaluation of the claims, as we all do on things all the time. People make claims all the time, and we make judgment calls and say, yeah, okay, I think that's fair, or yeah, I think maybe you're just over-egging that a little bit. I don't really buy that you're that offended or that you were that hurt. That is a natural human thing to do. That is something that we do all the time. In this particular instance, Seth Andrews is not the alleged abuser. Lawrence Krauss says Seth Andrews is a third party, hence it's not gaslighting. I haven't heard in any quarter anybody whatsoever claim that, well, the reason Seth Andrews is doing this, he's playing a deeply psychological game trying to undermine the sanity of the women that have made these claims. That's absolute horseshit. Nobody's even claiming that of Seth Andrews. This is a massive misportrayal on the part of Kevin Logan. So if you want to know what psychological manipulation looks like, I'll give you an example of psychological manipulation. It's this title by Kevin Logan: Seth Andrews gaslights his critics. We've got off to a great start, haven't we?
And been one of the few voices, one of the few lone voices standing up for actual humanism, basically. Because if you're going to abandon 50% of the human race, you're not a humanist, guys. I just want to point that out straight off the bat.
Yeah, I mean, agreed, but who's doing this?
And I have become increasingly disenchanted with the way the movement is going, and I've been expressing this for a number of years. And it means that I am no longer so prominent in the atheist movement, which is just fine with me.
Interesting. So you weren't really platformed if your message wasn't conforming with what the group norms of what is meant to be said about the movement is being said by you.
Correct.
Well, it could be that, Kristi. It could be more of a case that if you go to an atheist event and insist that rather than it being about the things it is about, it starts being about classic car enthusiasm, or maybe French cheese production in the late 19th century, you might get just a little bit of blowback somewhere along the line. Now, if people think I'm being a little bit hyperbolic there, a little bit extreme for comedic purposes, right, let me read you something now which Natalie Reed had to say back in the day. In 2012, when all this was kicking off, Natalie Reed was on Free Thought Blogs with PZ Myers, and make no mistake, she was one of his little coven there, right? They were all the in-crowd in with one another. Let me read you what Natalie Reed had to say back in the day. When I first got involved in this little pocket of the internet, atheism was never really my thing to begin with. I didn't particularly care much about the question of God. What I was or thought I was a skeptic, and what I cared about and was passionate enough about to become a part of all this was skepticism. The skepticism I believed in wasn't about some little club for people to get together and tell each other how smart they all are for not believing in incredibly silly things like UFOs, Bigfoot, psychics, ghosts of the Loch Ness Monster, nor was it even necessarily about activism focused on to address dangerous misinformation and charlatanism like alternative medicine, anti-vaccination propaganda, or the aforementioned psychics. But I saw absolutely no reason that skepticism couldn't be compatible with the social justice issues I also cared about, like feminism, misogyny, sexism, cissexism, gender binarism, racism, ableism. These things didn't seem meaningfully different to me from pseudoscience, new age, woo, religious faith, occultism, and the paranormal. It wasn't, of course, what skepticism turned out to be, or what it was I ended up becoming a part of, what I ended up being dragged through. Well, there's her perspective on that, or there's also the perspective that perhaps these people that already had an organisation ongoing, right, that had their interests and their organisation reflected their interests, and that was why they joined the organisation in the first place, didn't really appreciate some Johnny-come-lately coming along and saying, hey, all the things that you're interested in, all the things that your organisation's about, they're all really a little bit silly and pathetic, quite honestly. This is what I'm more interested in, and this is what I'm saying that your organisation needs to be about from now on. Maybe they didn't really appreciate that. Maybe they thought, well, if these are the things that you're interested in, perhaps you ought to fuck off and go to an organisation where those things are a little bit more relevant, because the thing is, the things that Natalie Reed are interested in, there's a whole world of political organisations whose central mission is to deal with those kinds of socio-political issues. There really aren't that many places where you can discuss Bigfoot, UFOs and the Loch Ness fucking monster, no matter how silly and trivial those issues may be. I have no misunderstandings whatsoever why she got the cold shoulder there. I'd have given her the fucking cold shoulder, quite honestly, under the same circumstances, but as far as PZ is concerned, what a terrible thing when you can't make every single organisation in the world about his own personal little socio-political issues.
I'm sorry to interrupt, Kevin, but you were associated with Atheism Plus. The last big time within the atheist movement, people tried to add progressive and humanist values into talking about atheism. And you want to talk a little bit about what motivated that at the time and whether or not those motives have changed?
Let me correct something.
Sure.
I wasn't associated with Atheism Plus. That surprises everybody.
Okay, so I was around at the time and I was involved, deeply involved in a lot of these arguments. And I'm playing this bit not to criticise PZ Myers, I'm playing this bit to set the record straight and say that what PZ Myers says here is absolutely correct. I'm surprised that Kristi Winters didn't know that, but I know there are a lot of people that labour under a misconception here that PZ Myers was somehow instrumental in Atheism Plus. He wasn't, and as he says here, a little bit later on, he actually went out of his way to maintain a degree of separation from Atheism Plus itself because he didn't want the toxic brand of PZ Myers to have it sort of dead at the point of delivery, if you like. I mean, it died pretty quickly anyway for various reasons, including the toxic nature of the people that made it up. but he wasn't part of Atheism Plus. So remember that. Don't make that mistake. Now, sometimes Atheism Plus is used as a kind of catch-all term, not to include literally Atheism Plus, the idea and the movement and the forum that resulted from that, but also the wider context of what was happening on Free Thought blogs, on Skeptic, at the Skepticon conference, ever since, that's been dying on its arse ever since as a result, that I would say, that happened on YouTube as a result, and the splits that took place. In terms of that wider context, then he forms part of the rich tapestry of Atheism Plus, as do I, as do a great number of other people, but he wasn't part of actual Atheism Plus. Remember that one.
Yeah, I can tell you that I first encountered this attitude in 2010, actually, when I gave a talk in London at the Amazing Meeting London meeting. And I gave this talk that was it was really a kind of a raw talk. Here's all for atheism. Let's go get out there and do things. And let's support this idea the country will be better if we get rid of religion. And in the middle of it, I just had this little aside about how I really despise dictionary atheists. That dictionary atheists are those people who just say, oh, atheism means nothing except that you don't believe in God. There is no other component to this movement at all except this denial of the existence of God. And people were furious at me for saying that, because so many of them identify as literally dictionary atheists. That's all there is.
I've got to say, this never really made any fucking sense to me, because this is a drum that P.Z. Myers has banged on for years and years now, this distaste for dictionary atheism. He doesn't like the definition of atheism that is in dictionaries. He must regard himself as a non-dictionary atheist. Why? Because it doesn't say enough about him, right? It doesn't sum up P.Z. Myers in totality, which is obviously the job of the word atheist, is to describe P.Z. Myers, right? There's nothing entitled or self-important about that, is there? So what he wants to do is redefine the word atheism to mean all the things that he believes in. But the problem that I really have is that P.Z. Myers has been applying the same straw man to dictionary atheists, such as myself, now for knocking on for 6 years, and time doesn't seem to mellow him in this regard. Nothing seems to get through his thick skull. And the straw man goes that effectively what a dictionary atheist is not just somebody who says that atheism just means a lack of belief or a disbelief in God, but that if you regard yourself as an atheist, somehow you cannot hold or express beliefs or opinions on anything else. And that's an absolute load of bollocks. Dictionary atheists like myself have no problem with any of this. They don't have a problem with you being a feminist atheist, with you being a communist atheist, a libertarian atheist, or a fascist atheist. What we object to is the claim that feminism, communism, capitalism, fascism, libertarianism, or any of these isms follow from atheism. That's the issue that we have, and this idea that there is a definitive conflation, and that is exactly the claim that was being made on Free Thought blogs, P.Z. Myers' own blogging network, back at the time in 2012 with his fellow bloggers, claiming that no, okay, Stalin was an atheist and some other people an atheist, but they got the logic wrong. But our logic is watertight as far as our logic is concerned. If you're an atheist, it is absolutely logical that you must be a feminist as well, right? And that is the bit that we objected to. Now, you can understand why P.Z. Myers would be so pissed off with dictionary atheists, because if you have an organization like an atheist movement and you want to make it mirror all your own political beliefs to the exclusion of everybody else's, people like me are pretty much a thorn in your fucking side there, because we are the people who are saying, no, steady on, you can't do that. You've no right to co-opt it for your own personal interests in this kind of a way.
Well, obviously I led off with something of a joke about them being like many theistic organizations, and for me they really have created their own little essentially atheist religion, where if you don't conform to their exact view of things, even if you happen to, and like you say, even the dictionary definition ones. If you don't agree with their politics, all of a sudden you become outcast.
Jesus fucking Christ, Kev. I know we all have our biases, but really, I don't think you could get this more arse about face if you tried. It was Myers and his bunch back in the day who was saying, we're not interested in your big tent atheism, we just want to be around like-minded individuals. And how, I just don't know how you could even attempt to spin this the other way around, when even to this day, it still remains the same. You know as well as I do that Kristi Winters was due quite soon to be appearing at an atheist conference with Steve Shives, and it was Steve Shives who was saying, I'm not interested in this big tent atheism, I'm not prepared to appear on stage on an atheist group alongside people whose opinions I don't agree with, right? It wasn't other people. I was the one making a video saying it would be great if you could have Steve Shives and people he vehemently disagrees with putting those things to one side and appearing alongside one another on an atheist conference. What an absolute crock of shit you're talking, Kev. Come on, man. Let me read you here. This, right, just to show you what a crock of shit you're talking. P.Z. Myers wasn't part of Atheism Plus in the day, but I tell you who was. Richard Carrier. He was very much part of Atheism Plus in the day. This was him speaking right at the inception of Atheism Plus. Listen to what he has to say here. There is a new atheism brewing, and it is the rift we need to cut free the dead weight so we can kick these CHUDSs, and I didn't know what that meant. Apparently it means cannibalistic humanoid underground dwellers, back into the sewers and finally disown them once and for all. I was already mulling a way to do this back in June, to start a blog series building a system of shared values that separates the light side of the force from the dark side within the atheist movement, so we could start marginalising the evil in our midst. And bear in mind, he is talking about what clearly turned out to be the great majority of our community here, including myself, not some fringe group of sociopaths, and grooming the next generation more consistently and clearly into a system of more enlightened humanist values. How? I'll tell you how. By making sure they're not hearing from any other fucking atheists. That's how. Jesus Christ. He goes on. Since then I blogged on sexual harassment policies and why I am a feminist, which smoked out a few of the dregs who attempted to defend their anti-humanist atheism. But closer to my growing thoughts on what separates us and ought to separate us within the movement. And that's it. And I don't really know what I can add to Dr. Carrier's words there, other than to represent myself with a picture of some scum throughout the rest of this video. It may well be, Kev, that you hear him talk there about driving out the dregs, such as myself, and think, yeah, actually, I get that, I'm on board with that, I'd be doing the same thing, right? That's fine, right, in this particular instance, but don't then make out that it's the dictionary atheists that were driving people out, where quite clearly, not only was it the Richard Carriers, the Atheism Pluses, the P.Z. Myers that were trying to drive people out, but they were explicit and open about it. They weren't lying about it. They weren't making out that they were doing anything other than trying to drive people out. So why would you sit there as bold as brass and try and make out that it was the dictionary atheists? The people who were saying anybody can be an atheist. Being an atheist says nothing more about you than your lack of belief in God that would be trying to drive people out. That just doesn't make any sense, Kev.
Yes, and you know, at the beginning of this session, you were talking about how the leaders are so bad about this stuff, and one of the reasons the leaders are so bad about this stuff is that the great mass of atheists out there don't give a damn about things like feminism. They don't care about humanism. So, in part, it's because the leaders are willing to follow the whims of their great mass of people who would attend their conferences or buy their magazines or read their books. Is they're not gonna rock that particular boat.
Yeah, you've absolutely nailed it there.
Nailed it, really, Kev? You know, I get there's like a kind of common theme I get when I listen to some of these hangouts, which is like it's like all the rules that we would adopt throughout the rest of our understanding of the world are suspended, and it's like we've suddenly been on the fucking magic mushrooms, and like everything's turned on its head, and everything that we'd expect as normal is regarded as abnormal, and the abnormal is normal. Listen to what the guy said, Kev. He said the vast majority of atheists, the great mass of atheists, were not interested in this shit, and that is why they are not having this shit at their events. Doesn't that seem an entirely normal and banal state of affairs there? I mean, what do you want them to say? Say, well, do atheists like acid jazz? No, actually, it turns out most atheists don't like acid jazz. Right, bang, let's make sure we've got some acid jazz on centre stage. Right, you know, why don't we have a temple right in the middle of the conference hall? Maybe have some signs there that say atheists are cunts. That's going to really piss everybody off, isn't it? Let's make sure we give everybody exactly what they don't want, right? Where else would you do that, Kev? Right, what other form of gathering would you look at what your audience wants and say, yeah, what we need to do is the exact opposite, and then somebody else comes along and goes, yeah, you've nailed that one.
Right. There's also kind of a catch-22 to it, in that what you want as a conference organizer is you want to be able to splat some names that are familiar to lots of people. So everyone knows Dawkins, so he's a great get. Everyone knew Krauss, he's a good one to get. You want those names that they see splashed across books in bookstores. And they're all guys, right? So if you want to bring in women speakers, you know, it's not intrinsically a problem with that speaker. It's just that they don't have the name recognition. So if you stock your conference with a lot of women, you know, it's not a failing on their part. It just means you're going to get a lot of second and third tier speakers, and nobody will know who they are. But the way you get to be that big name person is you participate in these events. You give good talks, you write good articles, and then you move up in the ranks until you are recognizable.
Well, this makes no sense, Peasy. You're talking out of both sides of your mouth here. You bring up the example of Dawkins and Krauss and say they get to speak headline because they're famous, and then you say the way that you get to speak is by speaking at these events. But Dawkins and Krauss aren't famous because they've spoken at half a dozen atheist events that practically nobody has ever heard of, right? They are famous precisely because they've done a shitload more than just talk at a dozen atheist events that nobody has ever heard of.
And this is, you know, that's like the front end problem of, you know, you just get the speakers that you think will draw people, and they tend to be the same white guys over and over and over again. And it's not exclusively, but it's really highly skewed in that direction. And that is the problem when, just to finish up, you know, when I look at movement atheism, and I do see a bunch of white guys, I wonder, well, you know, where is my place on that stage? If I wanted to do that, how do I get to that place? Because it doesn't look like there's a place for me.
Well, how about, Kristi, and this is only a suggestion, right? But how about you try to actually achieve something with your life beyond making endless hangouts on YouTube with Kevin Logan and then going on Twitter to troll Borng and his fans. I mean, have a look at this, right? I had a look, right? I thought I'd have a look at Richard Dawkins' Wikipedia entry to have a look at the awards that he's got throughout his lifetime, his best-selling books, the TV documentaries that he's accrued over the decades in which he's made his reputation. I then went and had a look at the Wikipedia page for Lawrence Krauss. I then went and had a look at the Wikipedia page for Steven Pinker. And then as a means of comparison, Kristi, I went and had a look at the Wikipedia page for Dr. Kristi Winters. And it turns out that you haven't even got a Wikipedia entry, Kristi. And honestly, you're telling me that you can't work out why they get to headline these conferences and you don't, Kristi. I mean, it's baffling, isn't it? I mean, what have they achieved that you haven't achieved, Kristi? What possible grounds could there be why they would get to headline one of these conferences whilst you don't even get a look in? I don't know, it's baffling, isn't it? It's obviously sexism at play, Kristi. It's clearly just because you are a woman.
And so just the optics of it are, I think, very bad for the future of atheism. I think there does need to be a farm system like we have with candidates in the parties. You identify talent, you nurture that talent, you promote that talent, because that's going to be the future of your movement.
God, I mean, some of this is actually quite depressing to listen to. I mean, it's like we can't expect women to actually achieve something like write books, present shows, promote themselves, and achieve some kind of celebrity off their own bat. We're going to have to provide some kind of remedial system so that they can circumvent having to jump through the same hoops the male speakers have had to jump through, so that they don't have to spend decades building a reputation in the same way that these men have done. I mean, I know, Kristi, that some women suffer from low self-esteem, but that's supposed to be a personal thing. You aren't supposed to suffer it on behalf of the entirety of womankind.
There is an inherent sexism in a certain part of the body, atheism as it were, that basically doesn't want to go and see women talk. They're not really interested in listening to women. I certainly see this on YouTube, and I think it's an experience Kristi has had on YouTube as well, with atheist circles, that the exact same thing said by a man will be listened to in a far more serious, considered way than a woman saying it.
So Logan picks this out, and I'm going to leave it with this bit. Okay, this will be the last bit. The Hangout went on considerably longer, but it got on to less interesting stuff as far as I was concerned. But Logan picked this out and pinpointed this as an example of sexism. But when is this kind of bias not the case? I mean, if I wanted to criticise black people, undoubtedly the criticism that I made would be less well received than if a black person had made it. If I wanted to criticise Jewish people, undoubtedly the criticism would fare better if it came from another Jew. If I wanted to criticise women, undoubtedly I'd run the risk that my comment may be taken less charitably, might even be described as mansplaining, than had that comment been made by a fellow woman. And then we come round to YouTube and the revelatory comment that Kevin makes with regard to Kristi's experience versus his own. We know that ever since records began, ever since YouTube made the data available to us, that there is a 90% male viewership for the areas in which we all swim on YouTube. It is overwhelmingly men that are watching our material and are leaving comments. So just riddle me this one. How come it can be seen as mundane in the extreme that for every other demographic known to humankind, that they take criticism better from their own than they do from somebody else? But apparently, when men on YouTube take criticism better from other men than they do from a woman, whoa, all of a sudden, Kevin Logan finds it noteworthy and attributes it to some kind of bigotry. Really, really strange, that. Really, really strange, isn't it? Okay, so I'll leave you on that thought. Maybe go and take some more tablets. Thank you for listening.